Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode, or your weekly episode and your weekly dose of Ahead of the Curve. I've got my guest, Chet Miller, on with me today. Chet, how are you doing?
I'm well. And how are you doing today?
Yeah, hanging in there. You know, it's a Thursday. It's another Thursday at an end of another week that just seems to like blur together, all as one.
Don't they, though?
So, Chet, can you give us a little background about yourself? And you got called out to be on the show. You're like one of the first guests I've had that's been like literally called out.
It's not the first time I've been called out by Berto, and it won't be the last, I'm sure. This is one of the nicer call outs, at least, so I'll take that. So I am primarily I work in video now as a programmer / support engineer position, but my background is actually in sound design originally. I did my Bachelor's of Science at a small liberal arts college in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, and then graduated into, that last catastrophic event, the recession. So went straight to graduate school because I spent 2 years as a chemist, and chemistry didn't really prepare me for sound designing in the real world. So I did graduate school in Ohio for 3 years and then moved to New York and was primarily working in sound, both design, engineering, and backstage A2 work, and actually took a really nasty ladder fall after a few years of just running around backstage and found myself on crutches for a month and a half and realized I need to figure out something that I can do with my life that doesn't involve running up and down ladders constantly. And had always been interested in the video side of the industry, had done a little bit of programming and engineering when I was in college and still kind of stayed engaged with it the whole time. So I decided I just want to focus on programming. So I sat down. I already was fairly good at QLab, taught myself Isadore and Watchout because those were the main things happening theatrically, and then did one of the D3 trainings back when they very infrequently offered D3 training. There were 2 of us in the training. It was done in Daryl Maloney's studio because it was primarily to train the programmer he had for the show he was about to do. And I just tagged along and got on D3's radar off of that, did a programming show for them because they just needed someone to step in and sub out for Ben Kitely when he had to go do the NBA All-Stars, which is a much better paying gig than off-Broadway video programming, as it turns out. And
really?
Yeah, surprise. Like,
right?
apparently there's very little money in off-Broadway. Like, no one told me this when I was in college. And so I feel very like my education was wasted. But I ended up making a connection with him.
Do you feel that way?
I mean, of course. That's why I've always flirted with going into academia, so I can just tell people don't make the mistakes I did. Because what better case study can you have than the failure of someone else?
Exactly. It would be amazing how many professors there would be, though, if all of us from our, from our industry decided to go in academia.
It would be so fascinating.
Basically based on that, based on our failures.
Can you imagine the quality of students? Like, I've learned 17 different ways to fail. I'm going to find the 18th.
I'm going to focus on the 18th failure. The 18th way to completely flunk out of everything.
I mean, isn't that what we all do as a hobby? Like, the best,
the failure of us all. I just want to say hey to Christy and everybody watching. It's again great to have you all with us and keeping the conversation. So as we do this every week, please feel free to make any comments in the chat and ask any questions that you want throughout the chat. It's a conversation between all of us, so we want you to be just about as part of it as we are. So, Chet, I think it's pretty fascinating that you come out of the audio, started in audio engineering and audio design, because that's essentially what the discipline that I started in, and worked in some small recording studios actually in Montreal, and then started working out of those that studio that I worked in. It kind of ended up falling under and I started picking up gigs in small nightclubs as an audio engineer, and then realized pretty quickly after doing between live audio and like studio engineering, there's a huge contrast and a huge difference in that. And I was like, yeah, like I don't think this live audio thing is like so much for me. I'd much prefer to be in a studio. So yeah, I picked up lighting instead. Yay! Speaking about going up and down ladders, that was a brilliant move. But you know what? Without it, I wouldn't be where I am right now. So I can't really complain about it. So hey, John, how's it going? Yeah, COVID definitely a failure. COVID is failure number 19 for all of us.
I don't count that as our failure. I think we can like take a mulligan and blame that on some other guy this time.
Dude, it's a failure of the human species, is what that is.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yes. It is very true.
So Chet, let's kind of dive right in. The whole topic is kind of talking about media servers and some of the technologies that we've seen over the past decade. It's been really interesting to see the whole industry evolve and change so radically, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Over the course of the last more than 10 years now.
Well, that actually led me to a really interesting question I was thinking about when we started talking about this. It's really interesting looking at the future, but we also just left the last century where media server use just skyrocketed. What do you think are the biggest changes from 2010 to 2020?
The biggest changes from 2010 to 2020. That's
in the programs, because I have a couple that really stick out in my mind. One of the biggest one is the kind of gelling and the focus of the 3D workflows, because up before that you were much more in 2D world, and then you had Disguise and VYV were doing stuff before 2010. Like that's really last decade was when that finally started solidifying, and we started to see the advantages of not only being able to previs things in 3D, but also what happens when your show is built with 3D first is kind of your point of view.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with you there, and probably would like to throw Pandora's Box into that mix, because they've kind of started off in that 3D environment right from the start. And interestingly enough, actually, high-end systems, Axion, or the disaster of Axon, started off actually as a Pandora's Box based app.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah, originally it was going to be kind of a spin-off of Pandora's Box, and then it eventually got converted and twisted into Axon.
Okay.
And I mean, I guess to the same rights, you can say, the break off of Evolight's AI, from D3, and the similarities there from Salvation, right?
Yeah.
So it's been really interesting to see the evolution of the media servers kind of come along over these past years, and also all the spin-off media server companies from bigger companies and even smaller companies, like the changes that we've already seen in smaller programs like Resolume, that kind of came out of left field, catering into the VJ markets, and really quickly got adopted by a number of different industries, for live events and VJing, and the concert industry has basically taken it under its wing a lot as well. So I think it's been like, there's definitely been a lot of evolution from the product perspective, and I'd also say on a very wide range of cost,
right,
along with features that are available. And it's been really interesting from my perspective, to see companies kind of fit now these niches,
right,
so that they're really focusing and streamlining on very specific workflows and skill sets to cater towards, being able to cater towards certain markets, but also, cater to solve problems that media server programmers and people are experiencing today. But Yeah, I would say that there's definitely been a lot of advancement in that 3D workflow for sure, and it's incredible to see how much that's transitioned and changed over the course of the last decade. To see how much of that 3D workflow, to see the importance actually of that 3D workflow, because it kind of baffles my brain now to look back at it and think to myself that we've been working in like this 2D world for the better part of 10 years with a lot of products, and you just kind of get accustomed to doing it.
Right.
And then all of a sudden this 3D world comes around and you're like, why the hell weren't we doing that 10 years ago? Like,
right.
This doesn't make any sense.
It's been a really fantastic change to watch. And there's certain designers who I've watched and have either supported in my time at D3 or have worked with, or just friends of mine, and watching really their design aesthetics as they go further and further into three-dimensional workflows, and seeing their shows get better and better because they realize the things that they can pull off from it. And part of that is also server output catching up. I do find that theater is fascinating because of the fact that depending on how you think about your output resolutions, I've dealt with just massive canvases because of thinking about using your most into universal pixel pitch in a projection-based show. Suddenly a screen that should be much smaller, but because you want to be able to utilize content across everything and have it all show up at the same size, becomes substantially more pixel dense. Like that all adds up very fast. Mm-hmm. And so that could be a major limiting reagent in earlier versions of shows that starts to get curtailed down as time continues.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. And I guess, the thing that I think we have to thank for that is the evolution, of course, of the hardware and the capabilities that the output that we have today, is tenfold what we had, again, 10 years ago. And being able to handle just so much more processing and power inside of one single unit, to what we had to use, the equivalent of 5 or 6 different units 10 years ago, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that whole 4x4K or 16 HD output box that has come into prominence is amazing. Like
and that wasn't long ago.
No, it was not. And here we are now trying to push even further because that's going to be the way of the future.
Yeah, especially as we get into things that are a lot more demanding in terms of like color spaces and color density, and what we're looking at in terms of being able to produce and output extremely high quality imagery, out of these units is pretty fascinating and amazing to see a lot of that change and how we perceive it, from what was acceptable, let's just say, to our viewing 5 years ago, as to what is acceptable to our own viewing behaviors now, has radically changed.
Oh, totally.
Right? Like our expectations now are so much higher than what they were 5-10 years ago. So it looks like you have a shout out from Lee. Hey Lee, how's it going?
Hi Lee, I'm really glad. So I guess I didn't plug this at all. I
didn't even know you've been doing a YouTube live video stream.
Yeah, so that was actually around the time you started ahead of the curve. Like there's a bunch of us who all were really bored or didn't have anything on our hands, or frankly, I was trying to run away from depression because I can't sit on my hands for that long without going crazy. So I started a YouTube live series, which is called Chat with Chet, because I'm really cheeky and very fond of my name, and basically started going through workflows, networking talk, touching on different topics, and basically providing it as a service to the industry, similar to what you've done with Ahead of the Curve.
That's awesome. I honestly, I had no idea. I had no idea that you're doing that.
Yeah, it was a...
Maybe I should start tuning in and checking it out. Hey, Sergio, how are you, my friend?
It's something that will come back, hopefully soon, as I'm getting, so I've started a position with VYV and are working as one of their photon specialists. So as I get more comfortable in that workflow, I want to start doing more presentations on that and starting to give people an idea of how all of this works. But yeah, it kept me busy, and it was a really nice way of just being able to provide something else for the industry, because there was with all the trainings kind of shut down as everyone's trying to figure out how do we pivot this to online. I talk really well and like the sound of my own voice, so I can sit in front of a computer for 45 minutes and click some buttons and say, look, this is how you do a thing. Here's OSC linking an EOS QLab and Disguise. And like, I can just do this from like the handful of computers laying around my house.
Yeah. I know how you feel about that, because my office has basically become a completely experimental laboratory. And I think the last time I did a count in my office, I had 13 or some odd computers kicking around now. Yeah, it's gotten a little excessive. So, and devices like you would not believe. My wife is nodding her head, and she's like, yeah. Every time she walks into my office, she kind of takes a quick look around and sees these gadgets and things kind of hanging around and this clutter that I have on my desk now. And she just kind of shakes her head and walks back out. She doesn't even question it anymore. She's like, yep, she's given up. She's totally given up. So Drew was asking us, what's the next thing that we see coming out? And I'm assuming that is within our industry and within the media server industries. Do you want to take a crack at that, Chet?
Yeah. So there's a
let's see how Drew kicks this back.
I could also just talk louder and see if he can hear me from his office, since he's about 30 feet away right now. So there's a couple things that are really exciting on the horizon. One is the thing that just kicked off at the end of really about 2017 is where it started hitting prominence, 2016, 2017. And that is the concept of real-time rendering, which of course is all the buzz from XR right now. But there's other interesting
real-time what?
Oh, so you know how you have a movie and it plays frame by frame by frame by frame? So I really feel like if I ever actually go into academia, I'm going to write a textbook on the demo scene and how the demo scene has influenced media servers. Because I feel like there's a really fascinating piece there. Because like Matt Swoboda went up in there. Some of the guys from Smode are involved in that. I'm sure there are others I'm not thinking of.
Ventus, actually.
Ventus, yeah.
Yep, the lead developer for Ventus from the demo scene.
Like there's so much, like there's something there, and it's just I'm too lazy to sit and do the academic research to actually make it happen. But anyone who's watching who wants a textbook prompt, that's free. Just thank me in the acknowledgements. So real-time rendering, I feel like, is cheating because it's already here. We've been seeing it. I will talk later about a show I did right before the pandemic ended that was all real-time rendered. The thing I'm most excited about is the integration of AI. If you look at what Notch was demoing as of 2 days ago was the big announcement about the NVIDIA AI infrastructure. Like that AI camera cropping is very cool. And I think that coupled with more powerful technology is going to get even better. I'm very excited to see as people play with stuff like LiDAR more and play with depth cameras. I think that we're on the precipice of those actually making their way successfully into concerts, because a lot of people have flirted with it, but it hasn't been the most successful yet. So I'm excited for that to get more of an in-depth play and really see what this AI can do in more of like a fixed lobby install. I've really been enjoying kind of the evolution of the themed entertainment and the concept of taking your boring corporate lobby, making a story about it, making it somewhere that people like to see.
Yeah. Yeah, on my side, I think, we've gotten the real-time part down pat now. And for me, it's been really interesting observing a lot of the workflow changes and the transition of a lot of creative artists moving into gaming engines,
right?
Kind of as compositing tools and as creative outlets, which has been really interesting. And again, to be honest with you, very surprising, because it's not new, right? Like
Right.
Unreal's had their engine available for the better part of at least 7 years now to be able to take on and work in. So for me, a lot of it's been basically seeing a lot of these workflow shifts, a lot of these changes in technology that's evolving. And I think what's going to be really interesting, and Notch has actually already kind of taken this on and done a really good job, is supporting a multitude of different interactive devices.
Right.
And allowing us to become more connected to the media and to the shows, and when I was working again back with Real Motion, that was something that I saw a lot of potential in that platform, was the use of its ability to connect to a huge array of different types of devices and be able to use them in a creative fashion. Touch Designer is also, derivative with Touch Designer, I think have also done an outstanding job on taking that on and being able to use a multitude of different types of devices and different types of data, and being able to like communicate all of that. It's pretty interesting because you mentioned NVIDIA with AI, and we've spoken about that a lot in the past as well. But they introduced this platform called the Omniverse for beta, which is kind of a whole collaborative environment, and that's kind of the direction that I see we're going in. Like where I find that as we kind of move more and more into the future direction of our business and as like creative designers and technologists, I see a lot more collaboration kind of happening, amongst some of these different companies. And we're already seeing a lot of that happening. We're seeing companies partner with other companies. We're seeing other companies that are not directly related to the market, maybe indirectly related to the market, getting market share in other companies. And you could tell that there's a lot of interest there, and there's a lot of innovation that is going to come out of that, pushing us forward, because it really starts to come down to workflows in a lot of different ways now, I think, more than anything, and trying to figure out the most efficient and best workflows for people to work in, because we're all different individuals. We all work in different ways. Our mindsets are set differently.
Yeah.
The cost of things, of course, vary and come into play with that. But, we all feel comfortable working in certain ways. And that, I find, is one of the biggest differentiators for a lot of the different products that are out in the market, is the way that you think might be different than the way that the program works. So you might look and feel more comfortable in working with another product that's been developed more with your own mindset, in place. Like for me, I'm very visual, so I like to have visual interfaces, and I like to be able to work in a visual sort of way. So I also want results as quickly as humanly possible. So, me sitting down and writing a bunch of code to try and do something, or writing a bunch of scripts to try and get things to work, I'm like, yeah, no, that's not going to work. Like I want results quickly, so.
And yet that open API for scripting is so beneficial to some programmers I know, because they just want to be able to sit down and make magical things happen off of their array, and just, I'll take the CSV and bounce out everything else I need. It's really, the phrase "it takes all kinds" is kind of overused, but it really does. Like there's room for every style of workflow, and it's been really interesting to watch all of that kind of evolve and grow, and even see the difference between me and other programmers, because I've definitely stolen some techniques from programmers I know. They've stolen some from me, and there's some I look at what they do and I say, oh, no, I will never do that. That sounds heinous.
What are you thinking?
That's painful. But it works amazing for them.
And you know what? The other thing too is we all have to learn, and we learn in our own ways, right? So, sometimes you just have to go through that to figure out that there's more efficient ways. I can't tell you the number of times personally that I've been in software and I've done things the most difficult way humanly possible, and then realized, realized at 4 o'clock in the morning that I could have done it in 3 steps instead of the 30 that I just took to get there, So Omar was asking, and hey, Omar, he was asking, do you believe video will always need media servers moving forward? That is an interesting question.
It's fascinating. And I think that one of the things we have to remember is the concept of what a media server has been evolving through this entire process. Because it used to be a media server was basically serving media. Just here's your frame, here's your frame, here's your frame. And even looking at what some companies have done of feeding a large media server into a Spider and E2 and doing their actual mapping all through there, but still doing all the playback and the media server programming on the media server. I think that media servers will have a place, but I also think that that role is going to evolve. One of the things I feel like is very clever about some of the media servers in the 3D workflow is existing as a translator. There was a show I loved as a kid, and one of the phrases that kept recurring is everyone gets connected. It was about kind of like the early internet. And that's something that I think that phrase will pop into the shower every so often as I'm just letting my mind wander, but everything does get connected. What the media server is doing is in some ways translating everyone else's world into one place and figuring out how we tie in our tracking software, our automation software, our 3D world from the game server, doing all of that and translating all of it. I think that's going to be where media servers are important moving forward. And also just serving massive amounts of content, because great, 30 frames per second or 2997 content.
Or 5994 or 60 or 120 or 240 or 480 or...
Those numbers keep getting bigger and those resolutions keep getting bigger, and having something that can just handle all of that throughput. It's great that I don't think that Barco wants to sit in the E2 and put multiple 4 terabyte hard drives to try and serve uncompressed media. I feel like that's going to be an endeavor that they don't want to get into. So I think in some ways that role is just, I'm going to serve media now, won't go away because media keeps getting bigger. It's now a 4-course buffet rather than a English tea. That's a great analogy. I'm going to keep that one for later.
You guys heard it here first, folks.
I really like analogies. There are some very weird things about our language, and that's one that I truly enjoy.
Just want to say hey to Holly, and I would agree with you. I think though there is always going to be a place for a media server to some degree, especially again as you mentioned, Chet, with the whole idea of uncompressed media. As a lot of you know, that takes up a tremendous amount of bandwidth, and it takes up a tremendous amount of resources to be able to deliver those frames. They're not necessary, of course, for every single project or every application, but in those applications where you need to deliver, extremely high quality, uncompressed video, I think there's always going to be a need to have some sort of device to be able to deliver those frames. And as far as the image processing side goes, we've already seen a lot of companies working on, moving into the area where a media server can also work with image processing or as an image processing device. I mean, D3 did a great job, or Disguise, when they created the VFCs to be able to try and mitigate that and create a really great backplane that is compatible with a number of different hardwired output devices, right? And then we're seeing a lot of the technologies that are coming out that are IP related or video over IP related are really changing the game. I think in totally disrupting the way that we transport video into and to other devices. So that I honestly think that within the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years, but I'm going to go really push more towards the 5-year mark, we're going to start to see lots of graphic cards that are going to come out that are not going to have traditional display adapters anymore. It's going to be network, it's going to be NICs, it's going to be SFPs, and you're going to basically plug your Ethernet cables into the back of your graphics card and your fiber into the back of the graphics card, and that's it. Put it wherever you want, mix it wherever you want it, whatever resolution you want it, go for it. And I think that's going to play a huge part, and I think that's going to be where we're going to see a lot of change in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm going to say 5 years, just being optimistic.
I remember having this conversation with you about 3 years ago. So realistically, you said 5 to 10 years ago, almost 5 years ago. So I think you're still well within your ballpark. I think you're right. Like that's what we're all moving towards.
It's totally calling me out.
I'm supporting you 100%. Like, you've been saying it, and you're still not wrong. But look at how display adapters have changed. Frankly, I still like DVI better than trying to deal with DisplayPort or HDMI. Like, as great as DisplayPort is as a connector, you still can only run it a certain amount of length, and that length is very finite. And with HDMI is just absolute crap for our industry, but people keep using it because that's what the market decided should win, and that's really unfortunate. But yeah, like, moving towards network and fiber infrastructure just makes so much more sense, because what we have right now are really stepping stones and non-locking. Not that I'm bitter about non-locking HDMI at all. But...
No, I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell at all. Or we could just go back to the analog days, and stick great big huge humbuckers next to everything. And
I've worked in opera multiple times throughout my life, and like having to get the humbucker out to fix your backstage conductor cam, it's a thing of beauty. Like, it really is.
And those things weighed a ton. Yeah. They were no joke. Whole lot of copper.
So did the CRT monitors that we'd have to use, because everything needed to be analog, because frame delay, like, what's that? We can't have that.
Oh, the challenges and where we have come. Now we're sitting here whining and complaining about our connectors.
I'm sure I will complain about connectors for most of my life. After how many times I've plugged USB in upside down, like, that's gonna stay.
Yeah, absolutely. Omar was asking another question too, with Spider E2, Aquilian, even VMX being a new broadcast switcher. Will these just be the norm moving forward for video engineers?
I don't think so. I think we're going to feed into them if you need the large amount of media playback. But I think that if you're not working virtual, there's still a very major role for the media server.
And the video switcher, by all means. Yeah. As I said, I think we're going to see a lot more of a direct connection between the two. We're going to see workflows again that incorporate the two, I think, more tightly. I know when I was working at Christie, we had a lot of focus on trying to optimize and work a lot of workflows between Pandora's Box and Spider, so that you can, interconnect and be able to have some commonalities in between the communication mechanisms, and be able to, natively do a lot of different types of switching and control, from either system. And it looks like, that's really kind of taken on in a lot of ways, which is another really interesting conversation, I think, is the whole idea of like intermediary software, people using, things like Universe or Widget Designer or Touch Designer, or, a whole bunch of different types of software to do those translations, or, as a utility to solve a problem.
I mean, that's one of the things that I'm loving most about VYV is they have this whole, in Photon, there's the FX graph, which can be used to do like real-time effects. which is cool. People like that. I don't. I really care about the fact that it gave me a logic engine inside the media server that I can sit and play with. And I've spent so much time just like, ooh, I finally can just easily do if-then statements. This is amazing. And it really, like, at some point, I'm going to sit down and try and make the thing I've wanted for years of looking at an output of a projector. And if that output is black for a long enough time, douse the projector. And if you start to see content coming through it, undouse the projector. Like, I've wanted to do that for years. And we're almost at the point that I can just automate that and not have to think about it.
Chat, I really hate to inform you of this, but everything is starting to really move over into laser. And you might not need to worry too much about dowsing projectors soon.
Theater is still a little bit behind in its budgets.
Yeah, absolutely. So Holly was asking a question, and just want to say a huge shout out to Holly. She's been a great support, and she was a great guest when she was on with me, and she does a weekendly show herself, which is awesome. So she's saying she's a media server newbie, someone who creates 3 to 4 channels of video installations and DJs. Do you have any recommendations of where a newbie should start to learn more and potentially purchase an affordable-ish media server in the future?
Those are very different things. So learning, there's so many great openings right now. I know we're at VYV working on putting together our online tutorial stuff. Disguise has really good tutorials that have come out. I haven't really looked at anyone else's. Smode has some pretty good ones online, which you have to dig through a little bit, but I've been really fascinated by that little media server. There's a lot of potential in it.
Yeah,
also,
absolutely.
Unabashed shout out, I did a really nice YouTube channel of talking about Disguise if you like their workflows and some other media servers in the past. Affordable media server is really hard to get at because it's what you want to do with it. And one of the things that I always want to avoid in a media server is I don't like thinking of a media server as a one-box solution. I usually want some type of control box with an output box, so that means there's also the ability of redundancy, which automatically makes things really weird. I've done a lot through QLab for very low-level, cheap playback, or kind of roll your own, and Touch Designer is always a solution. But as far as like affordable-ish media servers, I
just want to give everybody, a full caveat too, that both Chet and I both work directly for media server manufacturers. Yeah. So it makes the, well, I'm not going to say it makes the question difficult, because I've always kept this very, very agnostic.
Right.
And appreciate that my employer allows me to do this. But I would say my advice, just from on the Holly side of what I know that she does and the purpose that she's using, it for, I would probably highly recommend checking out Resolume. Resolume fits right into the VJ kind of workflows, and it's also scalable, expandable, and they've got a lot of resources. There's also a lot of people that are familiar with using it, and they've got a pretty solid community. So I would probably personally advise checking that out. It's also a software only. They have a software only option, so you can basically just purchase the license and plug it into your machine. But in terms of support and in terms of tutorials and the amount of learning resources that are out there, it's pretty incredible. Like, just to see how many people out there have been really pushing out amazing material to learn. I mean, we've been harping on this, and I hate to keep on beating on a dead drum or a dead donkey or whatever. I forgot what the expression is. My wife is already laughing. Dead horse.
I was leaving with the donkey.
I screw these up all the time. I'm horrible. If you guys ever meet me in person, get me making the, what do you call them? Comparison, I forgot. Those sayings. Metaphors. I'll screw them up all the time, guaranteed. I'll throw out something completely ridiculous, I promise. but yeah, I mean, as we've been saying, like week after week, there's an amazing amount of training resources that are available out there. And since we've all been in lockdown, like that's what people have been doing.
Right.
Let's bash out 20,000 tutorial videos, and that's why we're not doing it here, because those resources have been built for you, and there's an amazing amount of them out there. Chet, I know that we're getting like a little bit more limited in time, and I wanted to ask you, the big trend, and I had to get a laugh out of one of the comments that you made a little bit earlier in some of our private conversations, but I wanted to get your view on extended reality and XR.
XR is fascinating and something I have no interest in. I come from a theatrical operatic background, and I don't find XR really that engaging to me, because I don't want to go sit in a film studio and put up a bunch of LED walls and film. That doesn't interest me. What I find is more the ramifications of the integration of the game engines as content servers, and I think that's fantastic. And I love the fact that XR has employed many of my friends very lucratively throughout not only this pandemic, but even at the start before it. Like, great, please employ my friends all you want. And when I was freelancing before I took this gig, I picked up a couple jobs because someone else would be doing XR work and they couldn't spare them. So, oh yeah, of course, I'll go handle the LaGuardia Airport has a nice fountain installation, and they couldn't spare the D3 programmer because he was busy doing an XR gig. So yeah, I will go spend a couple days making that happen, making some gorgeous effects on water projection, and he can keep fighting the XR workflows. And I think we're getting very good with it right now, but not my cup of tea, and I'm quite happy not being a part of it.
Well, I was thinking that we could just kill two birds with one stone, or I could say like two birds with one rock, or two birds with one club, or
I think catch two birds with one hand is one that I've heard recently, which is nice because it doesn't involve murdering small woodland creatures.
That's very true, and that goes right to Tracy's point, about hating the phrase "killing two birds with one stone." But yeah, I mean, I would have to agree with you, Chet, to some degree. XR has definitely helped keep a lot of our close colleagues and friends well employed through the course of the last year or so. But it's also brought out a lot of really interesting, workflow ideas that have translated from it, and it's brought in a lot of really interesting, like, different creative ways of doing things, and multi-purpose, like, I guess a lot of rendering techniques have also come out of it, where we're starting to look at, rendering, and this again we've done in the past, but you're starting to even look at rendering things in more of a 3D way, in a 3D world, by rendering backplanes and rendering front plates, and rendering in-camera effects and things like that, so that you can basically deal with occlusion and being able to place things from a physical 3D world into virtual world and vice versa, like the whole metaverse kind of idea. Yeah. I would say that I have more of an issue with metaverse than I do with XR.
Well, when you say rendering, that brings up something that I am a little infamous for talking about back when I was doing trainings for Disguise, and will probably bring back up when doing trainings for Photon. I firmly believe the best artists in Notch or Unreal are not the ones who make the most interesting interactive scene. They're the ones who understand how to optimize the scene. And I think that's one thing that people don't think about is, yeah, I can make this massive open world that's super pretty, but if it can't be played back, what good is it? There are certain individuals who their emails would come in, and I'd look at it and shudder, because I know their performance issues could be fixed with optimization and looking at their workflow and figuring out how to make it efficient rather than focusing on making it super pretty.
Now you see, that's where I think AI can actually come into play in a very, very big way. Is if you can make a specific application that's truly sandboxed, and then you can apply a AI engine to your sandbox application and basically give it a bunch of libraries and train it in the ways that of your workflows, then it would probably be able to analyze what you're doing or what you're trying to create. Or, if you're doing something like I was, where you're creating 30, doing 30 different steps to really only have to do 4, it could be like, hey, I see that you're trying to do this, like, here's another way you can do it in 4 steps. Or here's a way we can optimize your entire workflow and optimize your scene and be able to do a lot of that for you, as opposed to you having to rely on the expertise of somebody else, or you having to know all the tricks and all the ins and outs of a piece of software. Yeah, I mean, we might be pulling some jobs away from people at this point, but it could also be very, very helpful and help us focus on other things that are less time consuming than optimizing projects.
And I'm sure there's going to be optimized specialists within the next 5 years. The people who can use that AI tool set, because the best part about AI is you have to guide it. Like, it's more, you can guide a robot to water, but you have to program to make it drink.
Absolutely. We're going to take one more quick question from Drew. He is asking again, what's the most interesting use of media server you have seen recently? Feel free to interpret what interesting means.
Honestly, I'm fascinated with what Smo did with their compo workflow, because realistically, they built a pseudo After Effects and made that their playback engine so that it's optimized for real time. And that's the slickest thing. Like, I am surprised that hasn't caught on more, because it's such a good idea for those easy corporate gigs. Like, if you can do all of your lower thirds just built out in that workflow, and then this person's name's wrong, this person's title's wrong, you don't have to re-render a file. You just change it in the media server and you're done. Like, I think that's been the slickest thing that I can talk about, because there's some other things I've seen that have blown my mind that are very heavily under NDA, and I'm not going to mention. But
yeah, I would have to honestly say, of course, the same way in terms of from the NDA side. But it's a really tough question to say interesting and innovative and creative. I mean, some of the interesting things I would say is, we were, and not to toot, our horn from the Seventh Sense side, but, we worked on a project with Universal Studios, with Universal, and it was for the Bourne Spectacular, or Stuntacular, the Bourne show. And it was a very interesting mix of creating a lot of mixed visuals using Unreal, and then taking a whole bunch of different animation and automation protocols from Tate Tower system, interpolating all the information and tracking data. And there's pieces of physical set that go onto the stage that are also projection mapped to where the actors are going as part of the show. And then all the visuals in the background are basically shot and animated in the perspective of the movement of the actors in the scene. So you've got the actors climbing up these automated objects that are mapped and react to the reactions of the actors as they're climbing, these different objects or getting on the different objects or scenery in the scene. And then you have the full, this basically huge panoramic visual or LED screen as the backplane or main visual surface that's kind of giving you all the rest of the context of the visuals around you. So you feel like you're totally immersed in this scene, and it's a beautiful combination or orchestra, I guess, of all these different types of technologies that are all being melded together, in one place, creating an experience that's just been really mind-blowing. And, we wouldn't have been, it kind of reminds me of like a combination of some of these extended reality workflows in mix with, in a mix with all of the tracking, technologies that we've seen, and projection mapping technologies that we've seen, all melded and merged into one show. So that was pretty cool.
Nice.
Well, Chet, we're going to have to wrap this one up. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here, having him here, and I'm a him as well. But if you want to check out more of Chet's work, please check out civdesigns.com. And as we've also mentioned, Chet also works for VYV. So if you want to see and check out more about VYV, you can reach out to vyv.ca. On my end, I didn't put anything here, but professionally, I work for a company called Seventh Sense. You can check out our stuff at seventhsense.one, O-N-E. And for those of you who are interested and do want to continue hearing me ramble on about stuff and technology, I've also been invited to be on a show for the Themed Entertainment TV tomorrow. That takes place at noon, 12 Eastern tomorrow. If you want to sign up to check it out, you can go to the link aotc.one/TETV. And next week, we are going to have Nick Fletcher on from Lucid Creative.
Wonderful.
Chet also laughing. But if you guys haven't met Nick, he's actually a really great guy and very entertaining. So I'm sure that conversation is going to go off the rails somewhere, God only knows, in our 45 minutes. But yeah, if you want to check that out next week. So Chet, thank you so much, man, for being on the show.
Thank you all for watching. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. And as I say every week, everybody, stay ahead of the curve. Thanks for watching, everyone.